going to lose my job, which they did. They all lost their jobs, every single one of them. And they blamed me for it for years and years, and I said, I don't accept any nonsense. Many Somalis lost their lives and their jobs, too.
So your siblings, your remaining siblings, are still there?
No. I come from a middle class, spoiled kind of middle class, where they all fled. At the first sound of bullets going, they all fled. I wouldn't be surprised if some of them are living in America. They do. I mean, many of them are living in America or Europe or somewhere else, because Somalia has been in a civil war for the past 16 years. I am the only mad brother who goes back to Somalia, and every time I was in Somalia a couple of months ago, and I saw one of my brothers in Minneapolis 2 days ago, and he was telling me off for being mad. As usual, he said, "You're mad. You're gone again. You are going again." So there we are.
Do your novels, have they been translated out of English? I know you write in English mostly, but have they been translated so that people in Somalia might be reading them?
Well, because my books have been been banned for many, many years. My name couldn't be mentioned. Anyone carrying a book of mine would be arrested together with the book for many, many years. And then soon after the dictator of that regime was overthrown, Somalia, the civil war erupted in Somalia. So it hasn't been possible to produce or publish books. My first novel, though, has been translated into Somali many years ago. A student did it as his BA dissertation, but it hasn't been allowed to be published in Somali. But the books have been translated into 25 languages, among them Arabic and Italian, which many of the Somalis also speak and read.
Do your novels begin for you, and I imagine they're each different, but do they begin with an idea, an image of someone or some place, an incident?
Well, because I write trilogies very often, I can pace my writing. I can take time off, 2-3 months of no writing. Sometimes happens as I do research for the next book. Some of the books, not all the books start in the same way. Some of the books come as the consequence of me seeing someone, just the sight of someone. And at times, reading a small little article in a newspaper could get me going. But once that germ begins to take shape, take form, and begins to germinate more and more ideas, and along with the research that I continue doing, I find that books, stories take their own, they assume their own lives, and therefore, I was actually telling, I could probably borrow from myself, because I was doing an interview earlier, and somebody asked me the same question. And what I said then was that I told the journalist the story. There is an Arab folktale of a Bedouin and his camel traveling, going through the Sahara, and then at some point the Bedouin pitches his tent, and the camel also, and then the Bedouin lives in the tent, and the camel complains first of his hind side getting very cold, and the Bedouin allows the camel to come in, and then says, my nose is pretty cold, and then the Arab is out, and the Bedouin is in. So in that same way, many of the stories that come in and shape in my residence in my imaginative archive begin to take over to the extent where the character begin to live on their own, and I am the one who is ejected. I'm no longer necessary. And all I have to do is to push the pen, and I finish the stories quite so easily.
In the literature of Somalia, is there a literary tradition that you feel yourself a part of, or a part of Arabic literature, or any of the sort of Northern African literature?
I was sent off to school at the age of about 4. My mother was having another child, so she couldn't have me, so I was ejected out of the house. And then the first language I was introduced to, the first written language. Now, in parentheses, Somali had no script until 1972. So even if you wanted to write in Somali, you could not write in it because there was no orthography, there was no script. And English, let me say this for the record, English is my 4th language in the order in which I learned languages. So the first spoken language was Somali, the second was Arabic. And the Arabic script and language is the first foreign language in which I was taught. And then came Amharic, which is the official Ethiopian language in Ethiopia. And then came English. And after that came Italian and French and German and a number of other African languages. Now, what I'm saying, the reason why I'm mentioning all this is because I read a lot in many of these languages. And therefore, I am not only a polyglot, but I am also one of those who has friends among the living authors, Americans, Arabs, Indians, Italians, and many, many others, whose books I continue reading. And there are, insofar as I'm concerned, no boundaries between books. I'm one of those who roams around unhesitatingly borrowing from whoever I can borrow from. And I owe my loyalty not to a particular literature, but to the literatures of the world. Suffice it to say, however, that the first great influences come from Somali, Arabic, English, and Italian. These are the 4 languages in which I read and in which I feel terribly comfortable. And I also say that my age group, whether they are American, African, Italian, European, we will all have read the same sort of books, because I went to a European school too. And therefore, we've been influenced by that spirit of time in which, Marcuse was important, Albert Camus was important, Sartre was important, Virginia Woolf was important. And so were many others who, 1001 Nights would be important. Rabindranath Tagore, the Indian poet, playwright, was important. All these have contributed, have made us who we are. And when we sit in a room with my age group, you are much younger than many of you are, I feel very comfortable. Same nationality, kind of. The only difference would be we'll be traveling probably on different passports.
You've mentioned an influence of Chinua Achebe, who's probably, he and Wole Soyinka, probably the earliest African writers sort of known popularly. Who are some other writers who are contemporaries that you enjoy reading, or that you might think influence your work?
Oh, but as I said to you, Madame, before, in fact, before I said almost anything that I read influences me. I am a highly susceptible person. And even when you look at me, sometimes you're influencing me. So I have to be wary of people looking at me. And yes, and I think it's all to the good, because we're influencing each other all the time. The weather influences one, and now I can mention one or two people, but then if I mention one or two people and then forget some of the others, I would say that the Irish writers, James Joyce and Samuel Beckett, influenced me, and so did William Faulkner, and so did Virginia Woolf, of the people whose names would make sense to you. And then there would be, other writers from whom I learned. Remember, I went to school in India, so, I was influenced by living in India. It was an experience. It was an experience living in India. And imagine making the choice to go to India when I was 19 in preference to come into Wisconsin medicine, where I was supposed to come. Now, I don't know what would have become my life if instead of going to India, I came to Wisconsin medicine. Maybe I would probably be living in Milwaukee, drinking more beer than I can cope with.
I know that there's a large East African and North African population in the Midwest. There also, I think, is here in the Bay Area. I don't know if you've had any meetings with him or contact with him.
The ones in Minnesota, yes, because as I said to you, I've just come from Minneapolis. I arrived from Minneapolis yesterday, which was a lot colder than here. And then I also met some of the Somalis in San Diego when I went there 2-3 years ago. I haven't had the opportunity to meet people here, except I can see 3 persons who are sitting there who look my people. Maybe they could be. But you're all my people anyway, so we are all human beings.
We hope so. We hope so. Have you thought much, you can say yes or no, it doesn't really matter, but have you thought much about the Nobel Prize for Literature and the talk of your getting it? I think that's a kind of an intimidating thing, I think, sometimes for a writer to hear.
No, I don't think about it. What I think about more than anything else is facing an empty page in the morning. It's a daunting task. And that is more worrying, more frightening. And every time I'm starting a new book, every time I'm starting, a character is asleep or walks out of a room and then you don't know what to do with them, that is more daunting than any prize or anything. And prizes, they're a lottery. Somebody wins it, somebody loses it, and it doesn't really matter. What matters to me is that I do the best I can in humility, and that my friends like my books, you see, my friends. And the reason is because my friends are the ones I meet, who I think about all the time. It would be very embarrassing if your friends avoided you because you wrote a terrible book. They say to you, well, we can't say it, but his latest book was really an awful read. And then they don't tell it to you, you see. They tell it amongst themselves. I mean, yeah.